Buddha's 5 rules for listening to get maximum benefit. The Buddha would often begin his Dhamma talks by saying, "Listen and pay careful attention." By that, he didn't just mean listen to every word. He also meant listen using appropriate attention. He never taught bare attention. As far as he was concerned, there were only 2 types of attention: appropriate and inappropriate. An appropriate attention is what you want to bring to the Dhamma as you listen to it. It means asking the right questions. How does this Dhamma apply to my behavior? How does it apply to my mind right now? Particularly with regard to things I might do well to abandon and things I might do well to develop, both in outside behavior and in what's going on in the mind. Appropriate attention reminds you that the Dhamma is all about comprehending suffering and abandoning the causes of suffering, so that you can bring an end to it. Appropriate attention basically asks 2 kinds of questions with regard to your behavior in general: what's skillful and should be developed, and what's unskillful that should be abandoned. Then, as you get into the mind, where is the suffering right now? What am I clinging to? How am I clinging to it? And where is the cause? What's the craving that's giving rise to this? What should I develop in the mind so that I can get rid of that craving? Abandon it. When you listen to a Dhamma talk in this way, sometimes you find that nothing in the talk is related to what's going on in your mind. It may be for other people with other problems, so you just let it pass. This is why the Ajahns would often say, don't give your main attention to the Dhamma talk. Give your main attention to what's going on in your mind as you meditate, and maybe 5% of your attention to the talk. If something in the talk is relevant to what you're doing as you're meditating, it'll come into your mind on its own. They tell about how Ajahn Mun would give long Dhamma talks, and how almost every one of them would start with very basic principles in the practice and then work up to more refined principles, with the idea that each level of the talk would be appropriate for somebody in the audience. You'd sit there, focused on your breath, focused on your meditation. At some point, he'd get to where you were in your path, and then he'd move on. That was what you were listening for. The part where he was talking about what's going on in your mind right now. The rest you could leave for others. But while you're listening to the part that is appropriate to you, ask yourself, what am I doing right now that's relevant to what's being said? When there's a discussion of unskillful mental states, do I have those mental states right now? When there's a discussion of skillful ones, do I have those right now? Maybe the discussion will give me some ideas on how I can abandon what's unskillful and develop what's skillful. That's listening to the Dhamma talk in the right way. The Buddha's descriptions of how to listen give some useful indications about how the practice of concentration is related to listening. He says that you should bring not only appropriate attention, but also a quality he calls Ekaggata. Your mind should be Ekagga, which means it's gathered into one around the topic of the talk. You're not split off, thinking about other things, tomorrow's issues or yesterday's issues. You're focused on one thing, on what the talk is saying. Your mind is gathered around right here. This point helps to explain how people can gain awakening while listening to Dhamma talks. When the mind is in right concentration, it's also said to be Ekagga, which some people say means one-pointed. So one-pointed that you're not even aware of your body. You're not aware of sounds. But if that were so, you wouldn't be able to listen to the Dhamma talk. You wouldn't be able to think thoughts of appropriate attention, because appropriate attention involves directed thought and evaluation, which are qualities of the first jhana. You let your thoughts flow along with the talk, and you evaluate what's being said as it relates to what's going on in your mind. That's what the appropriate attention is for. So this clears up that issue. Ekaggata, the noun form, doesn't mean one-pointedness. It means gathered into oneness. You can still hear, you can still be aware of your body, you can still know what's going on in your mind, and you're in a position where you can do something about it. That's one issue. Another issue the Buddha talks about is how to get the mind into concentration by listening to a Dhamma talk. Sometimes people say, how can jhana be necessary for awakening if people can gain awakening while they're listening to the Dhamma talk? We have lots of examples in the canon. The Buddha explains, as you listen to the Dhamma, you're getting a sense of the Dhamma. You're sensitive to the Dhamma. You're sensitive to its meaning. In other words, you see how it applies to what's going on in your mind right now, and you actually follow along. Something that's said to be abandoned, you try abandoning it. Something's to be developed, you develop it, and you begin to see the results. As the Buddha said, a sense of joy comes from that. From that joy, there's rapture. From the rapture, your body is calmed. When the body is calm, there's a sense of pleasure, and that sense of pleasure then becomes the basis for getting the mind centered in concentration. So in a case like that, you've listened enough to the talk to realize how it's useful for you, and you see the results. That brings the mind into concentration. So, listening to a Dhamma talk doesn't preclude getting the mind into concentration. In fact, if you listen to the talk well and the talk is relevant to what's going on in your mind, it can naturally lead to concentration. Then, from concentration, as the mind is really centered, you can develop more discernment that leads to release. There are lots of cases in the canon of people gaining the Dhamma eye as they listen to the talk by the Buddha, and it's expressed the same way again and again. Whatever is subject to origination is all subject to cessation. Taken on its own, it sounds like a generalization about the fact of inconstancy. But you have to ask, in what kind of mental state would that observation arise naturally without your having been told beforehand? Because in all the cases in the canon, nobody's been told ahead of time what the Dhamma eye is going to see. There's one passage where Sariputta, who at that point was not yet ordained, has gained the Dhamma eye by listening to a very short talk by Ven, a Saji, one of the 5 brethren. He comes back to see his friend, Moggallana. Moggallana sees him coming from afar and says to him, "Your facilities are bright, your eyes are clear. Have you seen the Deathless?" And Sariputta says, "Yes." So that's the key, seeing the Deathless. You work with the fabrications in your mind, get them really subtle, maintaining whatever quality of concentration you've got. Then, when discernment arises, you begin to see that even the concentration is fabricated. So the next question is, where do you go to reduce the stress even in the fabricated concentration? You realize that wherever else you could go would also be a fabrication, and there comes an insight. The mind can neither stay here nor go there. Then it sees an alternative, and the alternative is totally unfabricated. That's the experience of the Deathless. One of the things you realize as you come back from that experience is that you've stepped out outside of everything that is subject to origination. That thing you realized, it's not subject to origination, and it's also not subject to cessation, as everything that's originated would be. So the statement of the Dhamma I is not just a general statement based on ordinary, everyday experience. It's a realization that comes from something extraordinary. So, there is this possibility. Listening to the Dhamma talk can take you to something extraordinary. As you follow along, see how it applies to what you're doing in your mind right now. Apply the teachings, and then head the mind toward disenchantment and dispassion. This can happen while you're listening to a Dhamma talk, and, as the Buddha said, it doesn't have to come from the Buddha himself. It can come from someone else who is practicing the path. It can also come while you're reflecting on the Dhamma, and even while you're teaching the Dhamma yourself. There have been cases of people giving Dhamma talks and gaining awakening while they give the talk. There's one mentioned in the canon, a monk who's sick and the other monks are concerned about him, that he may die. So they ask him about his attainment, and a series of questions goes back and forth. After he said some pretty remarkable things about his attainments, they ask him, "Then are you an arahant?" And he says, "No, not yet." "What are you still holding on to?" And as he's explaining what he's still holding on to, he lets go of it and gains full awakening. So that can happen too. You reflect on the Dhamma, you teach the Dhamma, even reciting the Dhamma. Back in those days, they were reciting in their own native language. And in all these cases, the Buddha said, these are possibilities for an opening to release. In addition to simply meditating, getting the mind into concentration on its own, there are other ways of inducing a state of concentration through joy in the Dhamma. So when you're listening to the Dhamma, try to listen in a way that would give rise to a sense of joy, joy in the excellence of the Dhamma. Why is the Dhamma excellent? Because you apply it while it's being taught, and you see results. That, the Buddha said, is the miracle of instruction. Someone once asked him to show a few miracles to get more adherents, but he replied that people would always be dubious. If you read their minds, they'll wonder if there's some trick. You display psychic powers, they'll wonder if there's some trick. But if you teach them something that, when they put it into practice, actually gets results, they'll know there's no trick. This is the real deal. You know for sure that the teaching is true because you've truly put it into practice and seen the results. So learn how to listen to the Dhamma properly with appropriate attention. And remember that appropriate attention, especially as it applies to the Four Noble Truths, carries some duties. When the talk points out something that should be abandoned, you actually try to abandon it. If it points out something that should be developed, you try to develop it. That way, in the Buddha's terms, you get sensitive to what the talk is aiming at. You get sensitive to the Dhamma and its meaning. And that's what gives rise to the joy that later becomes one of the causes for concentration. And the concentration can become a condition of a further insight. This means, of course, that you approach the Dhamma with some right view, very basic right view. The conviction that you're here to train the mind, because the mind can be trained and it will make a difference in your actions, and your actions will make a difference in your life. The Dhamma that's being taught can be applicable to what's going on in your mind right now, what you're doing in the mind right now, and you're in a position where you can test it. If you believe that much, You're ready to listen to the Dhamma in a way where you can really benefit. Respect opens possibilities. The Buddha sets out 5 conditions for getting the most out of listening to the Dhamma. The first 3 have to do with respect. 1, you don't despise the speaker. You tell yourself, maybe this person knows something I don't know. Be open to that possibility. That's a lot of what respect is. Being open, not closing off your mind. The second condition is not despising the Dhamma. Something that may not sound all that inspiring or deep in the first blush may actually have more meaning than you suspect. So listen to it. The third is, don't despise yourself. Tell yourself, I must be able to do this, especially with the Dhamma that the Buddha teaches. As he said, he's not teaching anything that's not humanly impossible. He talks about developing skillful qualities, abandoning unskillful ones. And if it were not possible for us to do that, he wouldn't talk about it. He wouldn't have taught at all. He would have gone off and sat under a tree someplace, enjoying the bliss of release. But instead, he went to all that trouble. Think about it. Walking all over India for 45 years, even up until he was 80. Wherever there was someone who would be receptive to his teachings, he would go. Even in the last night, there was one person who came to him with questions. At first, then. Ananda was reluctant to have this person see the Buddha because the Buddha was dying. But the Buddha said, "Have him come." He taught him, and that person eventually became an arahant. Think about the compassion that went into that. That was compassion aimed at people who could benefit from the teaching. So here you are, listening to the Buddha's Dhamma. Try to be open to it, open to the fact that you can benefit from it and that you can do what the Buddha is talking about. He talks about being generous. It's possible to be generous. He talks about observing the precepts, something that can be done. He talks about developing goodwill. That too can be done. Start with goodwill for yourself. This also involves respect for yourself. You want to be happy? Well, the Buddha says there are things you can do to be happy. So you tell yourself, if I have goodwill for myself, I'll do these things. Give them a try, because that's all the Buddha asks from you. Respect doesn't mean that you have to obey or that you have to believe. You see this in the 2 remaining qualities he talks about. One is being single-minded as you listen, really focusing all your attention on the Dhamma. The word he uses for single-minded is Ekaggata. It's sometimes translated as one-pointed. In fact, some people, when they talk about concentration, which is defined as sitas ekaggata, which they translated as one-pointedness of mind, they say you have to get so one-pointed that you can't feel anything or hear anything, which would be impossible for the quality that the Buddha wants you to bring to the listening. Eka means one, Aga means summit, but it also means meeting place, gathering place, which seems to be the best translation here, because the Buddha also says that you enter and dwell in this state. So you want to gather your mind around one topic, which when you do concentration, is the theme of the concentration. When you listen to a talk, it's the topic of the talk. Finally, you apply appropriate attention. Appropriate attention means asking the right questions. This is where we can see that the Buddha is not asking you to simply believe everything he says. You ask questions. How does this apply to my suffering? How does it give recommendations on how I can stop suffering? Paying attention to these questions is, for the Buddha, what appropriate attention is all about. It comes down to the two sets of teachings that he said were categorical. One was that unskillful behavior should be abandoned. Unskillful meaning leading to harm and suffering, whereas skillful behavior should be developed to lead away from suffering. The other categorical teaching is the Four Noble Truths, focused first on what is your suffering after all. The Buddha identifies it as clinging to the aggregates. The aggregates are activities we indulge in. We chanted about them just now. Form. Your body is constantly in action. Feelings of pleasure, pain, feelings of neither pleasure nor pain. Perceptions. The labels you apply to things, the meanings you give to them, how you identify them. Thought fabrications. The way you put ideas together, the way you talk to yourself. And finally, consciousness, your awareness of whatever is coming in at the senses, of whatever is happening in the mind. We cling to these things. We cling to these things for sensual pleasure. We cling to these things because they provide us views about what His world is like. We cling because they give us an idea of what should and shouldn't be done. We cling to them because we identify with them as us, as ours. That's the big clinging. This means that the Buddha's analysis of suffering is pretty radical. Your way of defining yourself has a large role in how you suffer. Why do you do that? He says it's because of craving. Craving for sensuality. Craving for your fascination with your thinking, sensual thoughts and fantasies. Craving for becoming. Taking on an identity in a particular world of experience. Your sense of who you are in the world you inhabit. You want to take on an identity in a world because there may be something you desire in that world that you might be capable of finding. And then, craving for non-becoming. You've decided that the world you're in doesn't provide the pleasure you want, so you want it destroyed. These cravings cause you to suffer. The way out of suffering. The Buddha says there is an end to suffering. That's the third noble truth. And the way to do it is the fourth noble truth, the noble eightfold path, which comes down to three things: virtue, concentration, and discernment. The Buddha is asking you to apply the framework of these four noble truths to your problem of suffering. Again, it's not simply a matter of assent, saying, "Yes, this must be true," or "I agree with what he has to say." Each of these truths involves a duty, and it's in performing these duties that you gain proof of whether these things are true or not. Suffering is to be comprehended. Its cause is to be abandoned. Its cessation is to be realized, and that's done by developing the path. So the test is in the doing. When you think in those terms, then what you pay attention to in the talk is, what advice does it give about what I can do about the problem of suffering? How I can understand it? How I can see the cause and gain the strength to let go of it? After all, suffering is in the act of clinging itself. Its cause is craving. The reason you cling to things and crave them is because you feel compelled to, either because you want to, or because you feel you have to. So the Buddha is asking you to examine your attachments really carefully. He's asking a lot, but at the same time, he provides you with a path. And the path is not an onerous one. It takes effort, but it's not superhuman effort. The Buddha, after all, was a human being. All of his noble disciples started out as ordinary human beings. They just took the good qualities we have as ordinary human beings and developed them as far as they can go. Part of that involves developing your powers of mindfulness, your powers of concentration, to give rise to a sense of well-being. The effort in developing is not all sweat and tears. There's a bliss that comes when you can settle down and just be with the breath, to breathe in, breathe out, and feel really good about breathing in, breathing out, and having a way of relating to your body so that the breath can nourish all the little nerves, all the little blood vessels, all the cells. Think of every cell in your body breathing in, breathing out together. Right concentration starts with rapture and pleasure. As the Buddha said, it's the heart of the path. All the other factors are its requisites or aids. There's a huge emphasis on what you can do to give rise to a sense of well-being right here, right now. So the paying full attention, the single-mindedness, is not just in listening to the Dhamma. It's also in paying full attention to what you're doing. As you breathe in, as you breathe out, as you relate to your breath, as you relate to your different thoughts that either keep you with the breath or pull you away. When you can find a sense of well-being in the way you breathe, then it's a lot easier to hold on to the thoughts that keep you focused here and let go of the ones that pull you away. So work on this. There are so many people who are afraid of pleasure. I was just talking this last weekend to a woman who'd been practicing a method that taught her basically to notice that there was either pain or a neutral sensation, and to try to drop any kind of pleasure that would come up in the meditation. She said that she found it hard to do when she was away from retreats, and I replied, "Of course. There's no reward. You need the pleasure, not only for the sake of nourishment along the path, but also because it sensitizes you to areas of stress in your body, stress in your mind that you wouldn't have noticed otherwise. You come to see that engaging in those forms of stress, or the things that cause those forms of stress, is not necessary." That's the whole purpose of the Buddha's teaching. This is why he has you bring an attitude of openness and respect, because he's going to tell you possibilities that wouldn't have occurred to you otherwise. You can breathe in a blissful way. You can use your mind to be quiet. All too often we use our minds to ride all over the place, hopping from one train of thought to another train of thought, ending up in Siberia someplace. But here, all our thoughts aim inwards to that meeting place, to singleness of mind. As the Buddha said, people who live without respect, without anything to respect, really suffer, because there's nothing to open them up to new possibilities. There's nothing to encourage them to put forth an effort with the confidence that there would be a reward for their efforts. When you look at your behavior and there's nothing to inspire you in terms of what you've been doing, that just pulls you down. This is one of the things that's good about the path. As you gain the strength and the ingenuity to follow the path, you look at your behavior and you find it more inspiring. All the forest Ajahns talk about this, that they wouldn't have expected that they would be able to do this. But they had Ajahn Mun's example, and he kept on encouraging them. Yes, this is something you can do. The whole purpose of teaching the Dhamma is to tell you of new possibilities. Possibilities that can put an end to suffering. The purpose of listening is to open your mind to those possibilities so that you can take advantage of them, because they are there. We have potentials in body and mind. As Ajahn Lee pointed out, We have so many good potentials within us, and we use so little of them. Part of it is because our minds are too blind and too narrow. Our education narrows our focus, and they're threatening to make it more narrow, devoting all education to helping the economy. The Buddha offers a different kind of education, an education that opens possibilities of what a human being can do. So as you respect those possibilities and explore them, it's the respect that allows you to explore them. Otherwise, you wouldn't even think they were there. With respect comes openness, and this openness opens the world.